Good evening. Welcome to the Bible studies of the Banking Blessing Ministry. Today we are going to look at the story of Jacob during his first few years in Padan Aram. In last week's Bible study, we studied Jacob's relocation from Canaan to Padan Aram. And when he arrived at Padan Aram, the first person he met was Rachel, and then Rachel went and brought his family, brought his father Laban. And Laban, when he saw Jacob, welcomed him and said, "You are my flesh and blood." After 1 month, things began to happen. Jacob's life in Padan Aram began in earnest. And we are going to look at the first phase of his life in Padan Aram. This passage gives us an opportunity to learn an important function of the family structure. The family provides a structure for regulation of human interactions. We will see an example there in this story because Jacob married the two daughters of Laban, and we'll see how the Laban's family and interacted in the affairs to get the marriage in place. Laban, of course, has the authority to make decisions about his daughters' marriages, and his decisions include certain conditions, determining when the conditions have been met, and accepting or not accepting the marriage. And in practicing this, he had to involve his relatives. So this passage also gives us an opportunity to look at the council of relatives, which is a mechanism whereby families select representatives to organize their interests. Everything we do today is in Genesis chapter 29, verses 14 to 30. We will begin with Jacob's arrival in Padan Aram. Laban welcomed him, and after he stayed the first 1 month just enjoying his uncle's house. Then after 1 month, they had to make formal arrangements. Jacob they have to set Jacob up to do something and maybe to earn something while doing it. So basically, Laban, a shepherd, he has several flocks of animals, offered Jacob a job to help him take care of animals. And we'll read about this in Genesis 29, verses 14 to 15. Of course, Laban, the first thing, verse 14 says, "Then Laban said to him," I'm reading from the New International Version of the Bible. So from Genesis 29, verse 14, "Then Laban said to him, 'You are my flesh and blood.' After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, 'Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be.'" So here what is happening, Laban was offering Jacob an opportunity to work with him, but he realized that he needed to pay Jacob something. He's a growing young man, so he needed to make something out of the work that he will be doing at Laban's house. So Laban asked him for what his wages would be. Let us see what Jacob responded. Jacob was in love with Laban's daughter Rachel, and he told Laban, I said, "Look, I don't have anything that to pay for my responsibilities in a marriage to your daughter, that I would like to marry your daughter and I'd like to work for you for 7 years in return for marrying your daughter. Laban accepted the proposal, and Jacob went ahead and served Laban as agreed. He loved Rachel very much, so the 7 years passed like 7 days for him. It didn't matter to him that he was spending 7 years. It never bothered him, because he was looking forward to something that is very important to him, which is a marriage to Rachel. At the end of the 7 years, he requested that the marriage be formalized. Let us read about this in Genesis 29, verses 16 to 21. Verse 16. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I will work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel. Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to lie with her. So Jacob proposed to serve Laban 7 years to get, in return for marrying Rachel. Laban accepted. Jacob served 7 years. That went very quickly as far as he was concerned. At the end of the 7 years, he told Laban, he said, well, I have done what you and I agreed that I should do. It's time for me to marry Rachel. Please give me, let us conclude, let us perform the marriage ceremony. Laban agreed and invited his relatives, and threw a party, a big feast for the marriage ceremony. At the end of the party in the night, Laban, the custom at that time was they do this party. At the end of the party, then the young lady will be handed over to the young man, and then they will go and perform more rites and eventually become husband and wife. So in the night, Laban gave Leah to Jacob. Jacob didn't know that it was Leah he got. The way their custom in those days was, I guess the woman's face wasn't exposed. So it was like getting a parcel. So Laban gave Leah to Jacob. Jacob thought he got Rachel and went in with her. Then in the morning, before that, Laban also gave Zilpah, one of his maidservants, gave Zilpah to Leah as a maidservant. It's like a wedding present to Leah. Let us read about this before we proceed. Let us read about this in Genesis 29, verses 22 to 24. And I'll read from the New International Version, NIV. Verse 22. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and gave her to Jacob, and Jacob lay with her. And Laban gave his servant girl Zilpah to his daughter as her maidservant. Well, in the morning, Jacob realized that he got Leah instead of Rachel, and he really wasn't happy about it. And he confronted Laban and said, I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why did you give me Leah? Why have you deceived me? Then Jacob appealed, not Jacob, Laban appealed with Jacob and said, look, it is not customary in this place for a junior sister to get married before the senior sister. So I've given you Leah because she is the senior sister. Please marry her, complete her 1 week bridal ceremony. Then after that 1 week, I will give you Rachel also. You will marry Rachel and serve me another 7 years in return for marrying Rachel. Jacob agreed, and he completed the customary marriage process with Leah, which is a 1 week, completing 1 week bridal. They call it the bridal week. I guess it's like kind of a holiday or something to mark the beginning of marriage. So after this 1 week, well, before we proceed, let us read about this in Genesis 29 verses 25 to 27. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work." So Jacob agreed. He completed the bridal week with Leah. Then he got Rachel also as a wife. And Laban gave Bilhah, a maid servant, to Rachel as a wedding present. Jacob served another 7 years to pay for whatever he owes in respect of Rachel, marrying Rachel. Let us read about this in Genesis 29 verses 28 to 30. And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant girl Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maidservant. Jacob lay with Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and he worked for Laban another 7 years. So Jacob has become the husband of 2 wives. Remember, he came to Padan Aram with nothing, and in fact, that's why when it was time to marry, when he wanted to marry, he didn't have anything to pay for the marriage. He didn't have anything to pay for his obligations. The only way he could do it was work for it. So he worked the first 7 years, married. He thought he was marrying Rachel, but he ended up marrying Leah. He wasn't satisfied. He complained. They offered him an opportunity to marry Rachel as well. So he married Rachel and served Laban another 7 years. So he ended up being the husband of 2 wives, and each of the wives got a maidservant. At this point, the maidservants are not Jacob's wives, but you will see that their presence also added to what I may call Jacob's problems. They added to complications in the family. But Jacob now is the husband of 2 wives, and each of the wives has a maidservant. This was quite a short Bible study where we learned something about the family as a structure for regulation of human interactions. When Jacob needed to get into marriage with Laban's daughter, it was really a relationship or an interaction between Jacob as a family. Of course, it was only him. His family is really in Canaan. But he all the same represents a family that is approaching Laban's family for a relationship. And this is a marriage relationship. Now, the way they handled it in those days and the way it is handled in several places, I know in Igbo land, in Nigeria, that's where the way it's handled. The representatives of the two families got together, and these representatives represent what we call the Council of Relatives. That is a group of selected relatives that are put together to supervise the affairs of the two families that are coming together, to make sure that whatever they do is done according to the established customs and procedures. So the person that is coming does everything that he's supposed to do, but the people he's meeting, that they don't demand what they are not supposed to demand. And this is a very important function, and it is actually this function of family that eventually enabled different families to grow into nations, and different nations to have interactions with each other. Today, obviously, the interaction between people is handled by governments and courts and all that. But at the very basic level, it is the interaction between different families, interaction between people from different families is regulated by the Council of Relatives or representatives of the two families. We see here also Laban's authority in his daughter's marriage. He had the authority to agree or disagree to a marriage. You can see that when Jacob wanted to marry Rachel, he first made the proposal to Laban to get his permission. So he needed Laban to agree for him to proceed with marrying Rachel. Of course, Laban has the authority also to set the conditions. In this case, Jacob proposed how he will meet the conditions, and it was acceptable to Laban. Basically, Jacob will work for him in lieu of payments because he didn't have any money. Of course, it was also Laban's responsibility to identify the process. How will the marriage occur? Remember him talking about, please, we don't give, it is not customary for a younger girl to marry before a senior girl. So these are the kind of processes. Complete 1 week, one bridal week with Leah. Then after that, we'll let you marry Rachel as well. Then, even though he has all these authorities, he has to exercise these authorities in the presence of representatives of his family and the other family. Of course, the other family, we only had one person, Jacob. So the other family is, in this case, represented by one person, but Laban brought his family all the same to witness the process, to make sure that he was doing things right, to make sure that he was not cheating Jacob, and in general to be a witness to this important transaction going on. That is a member of one family marrying a member of another family. This is the same type of process you find in several societies in Africa. I know in Igbo land, this process occurs. Marriage is not done between individuals, rather families come together to execute a marriage. Well, today's Bible study was short. It's a very brief discussion of a short period of 7 years, of about 7 years in Jacob's life. Next week, in the next Bible study, we will look more into things that happened in Jacob's life after these 7 years. But what happened during this period set the conditions or set the environment for the next set of things to happen. Thank you. That is the end of our Bible study today. We hope that those people that will get the opportunity to watch the video or listen to the audio of this Bible study, we pray that you hear something that will be useful to you, something that will make a positive difference in your life, that you will learn something that will help you in your interactions with members of your family and interactions with other people. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.